All right, here we are. Let's get going. Hey everyone, Loudon here. Great to have you at our Kadenze Kontakt class chat here. Open up for any questions. You can use the questions inside of YouTube there to the text comments to ask me anything you like. I'll be watching that. There's a bit of a delay between when I say something and when I see something over there. So if it takes me a minute to answer, that's probably what it is. I saw there was a few questions in the forum inside of Kadenze, so I'll try to refer to that as well. But if there's anything to get us going, type in a question. I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'm gonna kind of bring a vocal into Kontakt and fool around with it and see if we can get in trouble with some sound. So let's see. I'm going to switch over to share my screen and look at some stuff there, and also kind of look over at the Kadenze forum and see if any new questions got put in there. So the one of the first questions that went in the Kadenze forum is about using a one of the Native Instruments control surfaces, which has a bunch of lights over the mixing over the key bed. Let's actually switch back away from screen sharing to have a look at that. So if I take this and kind of point down, I have a keyboard like this, which has lights above each of the key beds, or above each of the keys, and those can change based on which they can show different colors based on what's going on in the Kontakt instrument itself. So there's a lot of these patches like the drum lab and or the orchestral instruments that have key switching below, where different keys will have different functions. And the question was, how do I change the lights on the keys to match what's going on in the Kontakt sampled instrument you're making? Honestly, that's quite complex. You have to use the scripting functions inside of Kontakt to make that function. And in the final section of this course, the last session, we're going to start looking at scripting. We can only go a certain depth into it because it's quite a complex subject, but hopefully the scripting section will get you started with that, and we'll figure out how to use the scripting manual and to make custom knobs and such inside of Kontakt. And though we don't go into specifically how to deal with those lights, I think once we start getting into scripting and understanding how it functions, you'll have the tools necessary to kind of continue on and maybe apply that in your own scripts. The other thing to do is go into some of the pre-made scripts that do have that function built in and just start looking at them, right? Start kind of pulling them apart and figure out what portion of the code in those scripts is referring to those lights in the device. But again, it's going to be a little deep for a chat here, and maybe it's something you can figure out down the road. Yeah, it's a tough one, but it is a very cool thing. I think, those portions of Kontakt, in my estimation, are more, beneficial for developers than maybe the end user. You know what I mean? Like, if you do plan to make an instrument you're going to distribute, and maybe sell, then kind of going that deep into scripting is worth it. But if it's just for your own purposes, that might be a little bit intense. You know what I mean? I tend to focus on sampling used just enough to to kind of write a song with. You know what I mean? Like I want this cool sound, a developer for that. Developing a patch to kind of distribute and sell to others. Pretty involved process, but really fulfilling. And that's when I would tend to get into those manipulating those lights. But really interesting that Kontakt devices can link so closely with their controllers. You know what I mean? So it can really have that great interrelationship between the hardware and the software. Pretty cool question. So another question I got was sample loops, particularly how to use more than one sample loop in a region. And let's have a look at that. So I just imported a good sample here into Kontakt, just like a little vocal, and I'll look at using some loops and kind of create interesting sound from that. But John just asked, where do you find a good source of samples on the web? I think there's a bunch of great places. One of my favorites is called archive.org. Let me go get the link for you and I'll paste it here. The cool thing about this, what I love about it's the Internet Archive, and this stuff is designed to be used in other pieces of art. So it's a lot of it's public domain. It's like a huge. It's giving me an error saying remove any web addresses and try again when I tried to post that. So I'll just say it. It's archive.org. I've never had to have that issue, but check that out. Yeah, it's archive.org. It's a great resource. I think it's related to the Library of Congress. So much music, so much great speeches, wonderful stuff to kind of explore for sampling, and it'd be legal, So I think that's one of the big things. If I'm using other people's material, I just want to make sure that it's legit, that I can do that stuff. We do a lot of the sampling with those simple small loops, and let me give you another resource that I love for that. One moment while I find this. Yeah. Bummer is this is going to, again, tell me I can't post a link inside of YouTube. This is odd to me. It's going to give me an error again. I don't know how to do this. Okay, so it's Adventure Kid. .se. Does that make sense? adventurekid.se. He has an awesome collection of single cycle waveforms that you can use. And actually, I learned a lot from kind of looking through his website and checking his stuff out. Great collection of samples that you can use just to kind of build your own instruments out of. Again, I'm looking for things that are legal that I can use, Another one that's a good resource that I like is freesounds.org.
Critical alert from Microsoft.
Oh dear. That was odd. I guess I can't do that. But freesounds.org I've used quite a bit to find stuff. Yeah. Does anyone else have any good suggestions for places to find sounds online? Wow. It's freaking out. Seems to be me searching for that. Huh. Killed the chat. All right, I'll be back. All righty. Let me see something. I hope I'm back online. Sorry about that. That was an odd thing. I tried to go to freesounds.org and my whole computer froze up. I guess maybe that's not the best website to go to. All right. I'm just pulling up the student view here so I can see your questions again, and I'll be right back going. So the next thing I'll open up Kontakt now. Hopefully you guys have some great resources. Thank you, David, for sharing. That's awesome. Thank you for keeping things going as I vanished there for a second. But let's have a look into Kontakt. And the question was using many loop points. And I have to say, this is something I don't do often. Usually I'll use a single loop point. Rarely do I use many. But let's try it out and see if we can kind of fool around and see some of the details about this. So here we go. I'm going to share Kontakt here. And let's hear this. Let's see what it is. So what I brought in here was a vocal, and I have to say, like you saw in my my videos, I think working with vocals is one of the coolest things for me. So this is like a bunch of harmony vocals for a project that a friend of mine was working on, and so let's just check it out. It's just a single sample right here in Kontakt, and we see we've mapped it across a large portion of the keys. And let's have a look over here at the wave editor. I've set the start point, so the first bit of it plays. Let's hear it. That's a little high. So it's her kind of singing this really kind of cool harmony part. We're only hearing one part of the harmony, so it's kind of simple. But if I go to the end here, let's see what this last bit is. It looks a little more consistent. And I also like all those little breath noises. It might be cool to kind of build something here with multiple loops. And also we have all these cool little breath noises, which I can bring out, and all the different notes, right? If I start there, it's that note. So So we have these kind of bunch of different notes to play with, and it might be fun to play with different loops to kind of create our own kind of melody from this. So if I turn on a sample loop here in the wave editor, we'll get a loop that goes over the entire range of the sample here, right? So it's going to kind of loop everything, and I'm going to grab just a small portion of this. Now we have to remember, as we're working here, that we got to be really careful with our zoom. I find that I'm spending a bit of time when working in here kind of zooming in and zooming out, and it's not as intuitive as I would like it to be. So I'm going to just carefully zoom in. I'll tend to use this magnifying glass quite a bit and just grab these first couple notes, just this 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all different pitches. And we want to remember that the start point is different than the beginning of the loop point, which a lot of people were getting a little mixed up with in the course. Maybe I went by that a little fast. And so like a lot of different DAW clips, kind of interfaces, there's a point where when I hit a key, it's going to start at the start point, and they'll continue on there and then loop. Now we can loop any number of times or an infinite number of times, and then once I let go of the key, it's going to continue on until, if your release time, if your amp envelope is long enough, it'll continue on until the end flag, which is this guy right here. Now I'm going to move that right after these couple loops here. Just zoom in carefully. So now if I play, I'll hear that one phrase. And that will continue looping until I let go of the key, right? But what if I have more than one loop? Okay, and we also have the different loop modes, which we actually haven't looked, which we didn't look at in the course. So first, let's just look at the different loop modes. We have one that's until end, another one that's till release. Now you'll notice that what happened last time, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this. It's right there. And then I'm going to go down and increase my amp envelope release time. Right, so 4 seconds on my amp envelope release time. And so now if I hit a key, it's going to keep looping, and if I let go, while it's fading out, it continues to loop, which can be good sometimes. We can change that to where it loops, but then when you let go, it continues on the sample. Now, this is really cool because I might want to get that breath at the beginning of the next phrase kind of included in the release time, or just the end of this included in that release. Or I can set this loop right here, right? So that it's kind of more looping the kind of body of that, that phrase, and then when I release, it'll continue on and bid the bill and continue the build. Let's try it. So that kind of loops that one section. I can make it a little smoother by adding a little bit of a crossfade. Right? And if I let go, it continues on looping. But I can change that to say until release. Let's try that. Now we try it. And I let go. And then it continues on during that release phase. Now, if I shorten up my amp envelope, this could be a little better, right? So now we'll get even shorter here. I'll play this note. Maybe a little longer than that. A little longer than that. Let's do 1.5 seconds. Right? And now I can take my end flag and put it right there. And now so I can loop until I let go, and then I'm gonna get the rest of that at the end of it, right? Kind of cool. And then I can do that with the whole harmony, which is also kind of cool. And of course, if I wanted that all to be in time, I could change the playback mode to be, say, Time Machine Pro, right? So now if I play a chord, we get all that, which is kind of cool. When I let go, it'll loop that middle section. And then when I let go, it kind of finishes out the phrase. So that the different loop modes can be really nice to determine kind of what happens when you release a key. If I wanted to keep looping that phrase and kind of fade away that single phrase, then I might say until end. But if I wanted to continue on after I release the key, we can move it to until release. It's going to loop until the release of the key, and then it'll stop looping. Now, what if I have a second loop? How's this going to function? Well, let's try it. Again, this is something I haven't played with a whole lot. We can try it. I'll engage the second loop now. This is interesting. And we'll put this on a different note, or maybe I'll put this on a breath here. Now, what's going to happen? If I go to loop 1, we have a count set to 0. Let's set this count to 2. And I'll go to this loop and set this count to 2. All right, let's try it. And then it stops, right? And let's add another one. Let me do a third loop here. Now, the interesting thing about this is you kind of have to put them, from what I understand, kind of after each other in the right order. So let's see. If I set this one I'll put a count to 4. Let's see what happens. This one I'll have the count at 0. Let's see what happens. That loops. But it never gets to this loop. You know what I mean? And so what if I put this one after this one? Let's try that. And it fades away. I have to tell you, I haven't used this function much, and it's not functioning as I would expect. You know, I would think I'd be able to keep going and do many. Well, maybe because that one's until release. Let's say until end, till end, till end. Let's try it. That's that one. Keep going. That's it. Strange. Let me try with a different sample mode. So yeah, I haven't found much of a use for many loops. I mean, I would like it if I could jump between them, and I think there's much more you can do with scripting, because with scripting you can jump the playback to specific locations, which when this might be might come a little more useful. But right now, I'm not finding it super useful. Let's try it with sampling mode and see here. Yeah, so I thought that might happen. And this is something that I find a lot with Kontakt, is that a lot of these more advanced functions like the zone envelopes, and now I'm finding with these loops here, will function really well in the sampler mode, but there might be some quirks if you're starting to use some of these other playback modes. And so when I was in sampler mode, I'm finding the loops are kind of working kind of how I would expect, is that it does the number and then it moves on, right? So if I take this loop and put it here, and then this one and put it here, and also this might be cool if I had the grid mode on, right? So let's turn a grid on, and it's set to 16th. This will keep things kind of locked into a grid so we can get some kind of meter going. I'll have this one count 4 times. We'll do this one 4 times. We'll do this one 2. Let's see what happens now. Kind of cool for some glitchiness. I actually kind of like that. Maybe we'll get this one doing it like 3 times and get another loop in to do even more. Loop 4. I think I would dig this with drum grooves. You know, you can just like stutter edit one little bit of it. Might be fun to play with. Let's try this. Kind kind of neat. Yeah, so that might be something to play with. That's multiple loops. And again, each one you can turn on by clicking the number here, and you can also choose the count, how many times it'll play that. And you can also turn them off by clicking these power buttons as you go. But again, I'm really, in the instruments I've made, I really tend to focus on just having a single loop. But Allison, I'm glad you dig it. Maybe something you can explore and share with us in the class. I'd love to hear what you do with it, because that's totally kind of a new function for me. Now, if you like that, I'd like to point out another function here that I actually use all the time that's kind of super complex. Would you guys be okay going down a complex path with me? Would that be okay? Something a little unusual? And this function I'm thinking of looking at is zone envelopes. So zone envelopes are kind of cool, because there's this thing about Kontakt that I love, and that it's like you play a key and it plays back the sound, and I can play it across the keyboard, and I can add all these cool modulators like LFOs and envelopes to change things like pitch. But it's hard often to associate what's going on in the envelopes or the LFOs with the underlying sound itself. I don't know if you've dealt with this, but for me, sometimes I want like a pitch change to happen right at a certain point in the audio. And there's no way for me to say, I don't know, change the pitch at this point in the sound. It's always like an LFO over the whole sound I'm making. So if I want to have like the pitch go at a very certain point in the sound, I might have to open it up in the DAW and use automation. But there's this kind of little known function which is called zone envelopes, which allows us to apply a modulator directly over our sound. And this is really fun for like vocal manipulations and kind of really glitching things out. And I often find, again, that this works better in sampler mode than it does in the time machine modes, but it can be very cool in the time machine modes. We might find some of those little quirks like we did with the loops. So I have this back where I can just play a note. And I'd like to go, ooh, ooh. I want to have like this cool pitch drop at the end of one of these phrases, right? And we'll be able to just manipulate pitch right on top of this. So I'll go to zone envelopes. And the idea is I can have a modulator that I can just draw on top of my waveform here. And I can have it control anything inside of Massive. So kind of cool, but it's also a little tricky. And so the first thing to know is you have to know which what parameter you're applying this to. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of tweak tuning. And you'll see where it says add, it just jumped over to tune. If I move panning, that add button jumps over to panning, right? So like it's learning the last thing you're clicking on, and you don't even need to move it. Like I don't have to jiggle tuning, I just have to click on it or pan, or if I had like filter cutoff, I could click on that, right? So we just click on something and we have this option to add a zone envelope for that parameter. So I clicked on tuning, I see add, I click add, bam. Now that just created a line right here, right? And now I can manipulate tuning with that line, right? And again, this is a little tricky to manipulate. Now, if I click, oops, sorry. If I right click, it'll add a breakpoint. I hope you guys can see that. It added a little rectangle there. And I can right click to add another breakpoint. I can click to add another breakpoint. And I can right click and I can just move this down like this, right? And so now I have these great, what do they call them? Boolean Bezier curves, right? Kind of. Just like I can just adjust the curvature of this, right? And so now let me hear it. Ooh. Yeah, ooh, ooh. Right? That was pretty neat. Let's try to do more dramatic. Ooh. That's kind of neat, right? right? Without that, when I had this back here, it was just like a steady note. Right? But when I get this, it's kind of cool. Now I can add as many of these breakpoints and dots as I like to manipulate pitch across the way. Now there's an interesting one. It says envelope follows playback speed. That's really useful when you are manipulating pitch, right? I'm glad you like it, Allison. I think it's so cool too. Now there's a couple things we want to be aware of. Let's scroll down, and I'm changing tuning, right? So I click on mod. We'll see zone envelope is modulating pitch, right? And like before, with everything else we've done with modulation, we always have a modulation source and a destination. So the source is the zone envelope, the destination is pitch, and an amount. And so right now that was only going down by, I think, a step, or, yep, 2 semitones, a full step. If I just crank this way up, now, I like that. Now we can add more breakpoints to keep it down there, so it just kind of drops down and then jumps up for the breath, right? And maybe we'll get that breath to kind of be the thing that kind of ramps up. Fun. Right, now I can even create a bunch of different notes in here if I wanted, by like just making breakpoints up here and then down here and then down here. I don't even know, right? But we can get these kind of cool things happening. And if we turn our grid on, it's easy to snap these to the grid so that when this when this is lined up to your tune, you can make like these notes happen easily right in time with your music. So having that grid there can be kind of cool. But let's hear this now. Right, let's get this another breakpoint down to here. So I think this, I mean, we can do a lot of this with like step sequencers, but we can't associate it with the song itself, you know, with the underlying sound itself. And then we'll get back to pitch here. Right, now there's a way I use this which I really like. Let's try this first. Oh, I like that. And I might get this like there. Yeah, let's try this one more time. Maybe I'll get rid of these. You can right click to get rid of a breakpoint too, if you just want to kind of get rid of it. Try that. So that's a really fun trick. Now, one thing that I would like to do with this, which I would challenge you to kind of all try, is a technique I call catch and release. And I don't have time to do it right now, but I want to point it out to you. And so the idea with catch and release is you take your whole track, right? So once you finish your song or you do like a render of like a portion of it, right? And then you cut out, say, 2 quarter notes, a half note, right before a section change. So maybe at the end of your verse, you cut out just 2 quarter notes, the last 2 quarter notes before your chorus, and then render that as a new audio file and bring it into Kontakt, right? And then you put a MIDI note that starts right at that same place, right? So if you play back your track, you're gonna see it like playback, and then Kontakt's gonna play back that little bit, and then you're back into playing back the audio, right? So you're in your DAW, you have your track on one, you have your song on one track, you have Kontakt on the next, you take a little slice of that whole track, you drag it down to the Kontakt track, basically, right? Move it into Kontakt, you put a MIDI note right in that little slot, right? So Kontakt is like taking over just for that moment. And then you play with this stuff, right? So that you have that moment that you have this like really cool effect. Like, okay, right before the chorus comes in, and then it just jumps back into the DAW playing it. It's a really cool trick, and it also kind of gets you kind of really good with these techniques, right? You kind of be precise about the volumes and about trimming it carefully, about exporting from your DAW, importing into Kontakt well. So it's gonna kind of, you know, work out all these techniques a little bit, kind of get some practice. And it also is a great way to get some really cool effects. Like I can imagine this kind of sound happening right before the chorus of a track. So zone envelopes, super fun. Let's go back into Kontakt and check out some other stuff. While I'm going here, if you guys have any questions, please post them right into the YouTube text chat there. I'm looking over it. I'm seeing what you guys are saying, and if there's anything, I'm happy to check it out. Cool. So zone envelopes, super fun, worth checking out. And let's try the same thing now. If I hold a chord with this, let's see what happens. That's a little nutty because the speed is changing for all those, right? Now, if I was to switch this over to, say, Time Machine Pro, let's see what happens then. It all stays in time pretty well, you know? So that might be a cool function to create kind of new melodies from a vocal that you already have. Something kind of fun. All right, so that's using the, excuse me, that's using the zone envelopes and switching to Time Machine Pro. Let's look at some other kind of cool functions. So there was a question in the Kadenze forum that was asking about which of the kind of built-in instruments I like that has like really cool stuff going on that I really like. And so let's check out a couple things from the library that I'm totally digging on. All right. So first off, there's a ton of great third-party stuff. So you'll see I have a huge collection of stuff in my library. And so you might consider kind of purchasing some more, you might consider trying to purchase some other libraries. Hey, Allison, I think I just kept those in time. Did that make sense? When I switch the playback mode over to Time Machine, that should do it for you. It should keep them all in time if your playback mode is in Time Machine. And if that wasn't clear, the one thing I would suggest, there's a lesson in the one of the videos that I did in the course that uses a vocal, and I play things back with harmony, and that's that same thing, which is changing the playback mode to one of the Time Machine modes. I'm sorry I kind of moved on because there's a big delay between me seeing your text and I already closed out the instrument. But if that doesn't make sense, let me know and I'll come back to it and I'll show you the button. So there's a bunch of instruments I really like that you can buy in addition to Kontakt. And one of the ones I'm most impressed with really heavily uses scripting, and that is called Rise and Hit. Let's check it out. Where is it? I get lost in this a little bit. Yep, Rise and Hit. So this is one of these cool ones. Again, this is you'd have to purchase it in addition to Kontakt, right? You purchase it as an additional purchase through Native Instruments, but it's a super cool instrument, and it really shows off what's possible with Kontakt. And so the idea here is it's trying to create this classic sound, which we've actually been working on a bit in our classes, which is what you have this kind of like big build and then an impact, right? Really common in electronic music to kind of signify that a section is changing. And the cool thing with this is a ton of different possibilities in both the build-up sound it has and also the kind of big impact at the end of that. And then also, it's always timed right to a number of beats in your project. And so I'll answer that about live performance. It's a really good one. I'll show some cool tips for that. And so Rise and Hit is great because it allows you to choose a sound for the build and a sound for the hit, and it's always going to be in time with your music. Everything's kind of quantized really well. And so it's also a great example of what's possible with scripting, which we're going to get into in the final session of the course. And so we have this, we kind of divide this up between the rise, which is right here, the first portion of the build, and then the hit, which is supposedly kind of come at the beginning of the next section. So for me, I'm usually hitting the this to 16, which is how long that rise is going to be. It says rise time, 16 beats. So no matter what your tempo is, it's going to take 16 beats to rise up. And then we have this option for, we can search for a kind of sound for the rise. And I'll choose discordant sibs, maybe. Hit check on that, and that changed what this is. And then I can search for what sound comes at the impact. Let's do electronic, I don't know, machine overload. That sounds cool. Let's hear this. So we have this big build, discordant build. And then we have a hit, right? And this is always going to be 16 beats, no matter what the tempo is of your main DAW. That's always going to happen in time. I use this all the time. It's super cool. You can have many layers of it. Really powerful instrument, and really shows off what's possible with Kontakt. So this is one I would totally try out. Yep. And let's try another one. Let's say save changes instrument. No, so that's a great one. Another one I really like that's built into maybe the larger version of Kontakt, which is going to be action strings. And there's a lot like this. Let's find action strings right here. Instruments, we'll try action strings. So this is really cool because I play. So it has a huge number of rhythms built into it, and I can switch between those rhythms using key switches. So we have C0, C sharp 0, D0, D sharp 0 down here. And if I play one of those keys, it'll switch between the rhythms in real time. So I'm going to go down an octave on my keyboard. And now if I play those low notes, you'll see this is jumping around. That's because I'm playing these low notes. You see this, like, this here is bouncing around. And so if I play C sharp, D, right? And so now I can just hold a chord in my right hand, or even change that chord or play a melody, but the strings are going to play a rhythm and always play in time with my music. And we can search through a huge number of possible rhythmic figures. So let's try like the chase, small ensemble. Go for that. So now I have all these cool rhythms now, right? So if I hold just C, oh, here we go. That accent's great. Right, and then C sharp. Right in there, it already has that cool melody built in. That's super cool. Okay. Or we go for some other ones. What about machine guns? So this kind of instrument I think is really cool. Mostly because these are all recordings of real performances. And so they sound a lot better than trying to do these type of phrases just with MIDI, right? So someone really recorded performing each one of these phrases on their instrument, and so it has a much more natural character. And all the changing between these low notes, we can just record into our DAW. So you'll find this kind of interface all over the Kontakt stuff. A low note changes what the instrument does, and the higher notes or notes that are in the range of the instrument maybe controls the notes that's being played. And so David has some specific questions about this type of instrument. He's saying how to best record the results in real time scripted parameters that aren't available for automation but can be modulated by hand, how to record scripted effects that don't have key switches. And you will find things in some places like David is talking about. For instance, if I go to another one of my favorite instruments, which is if I go to one of my favorite instruments, which is DrumLab, this parameter right here, which switches between acoustic and electronic, is not automatable, right? If I go to automation, I can't assign it, right? There's nothing I can do with it. And so in those instances where, anything that's in the instrument, when we've talked about in our course, a lot of like setting up our own modulation and all this other things, if it's just a parameter in here, you know how to set up the modulation. But if it's something in one of these custom scripted instruments that doesn't have an automation, it isn't automatable, then you're going to have to record to audio as you perform it. That's kind of the only option. And so that's kind of a bummer, right? You can't go back and edit it, but that's what you're going to have to do. Is you would have to just play, perform with the mouse, and record it to audio as you're as you're performing it. That'd be the only way that I could see to retain those changes in a permanent way. Yeah, so that'd be it. And there's some things like that. Now, there's not many, and I found that most things I do want to automate, I can, but there have been a couple instances like this acoustic to electronic fader, which is super cool, right? If I have a kick drum sound. I can switch between, right? But there's no way for me to set that to be like the mod wheel or something without going in and editing the script, which would be, I think, a bit tough. Yeah. So that's the challenge. It's a bummer. I've run into that a couple times, but I'd like to provide an alternate perspective on that. Right. It's one of these things like creativity thrives within limits. And sometimes that just means you got to practice the mouse move a couple times, get it right, and then record it. And the beautiful thing about getting to audio soon, I often actually prefer to get to audio soon. I like to be in audio right away. And so that way you're using less CPU. And if you don't leave options open for yourself, you won't be distracted by all the options, And so a lot of times I think back to when we were using tape and we had hardware synthesizers, we would practice and then record it and then move on with life, right? But now there's this tendency to just simply record and then edit forever, And I have to say, practicing is way more fun than editing. Practicing isn't super fun, but it's definitely more fun than editing. And so I would rather practice a bit. And I think it's I don't know. I think there's like a 5-to-1 relationship. I feel like if I practice for a minute, that's worth about 5 minutes of editing, sometimes more even, So Tom, some things that you'll find can't be automated. Most of it can, the vast majority can, but there are sometimes you'll find certain things particularly in these scripted interfaces that are just not automatable. And that's what David was replying to. Like this fader right here, I can't go to host automation and assign it, right? If I tried to assign it to an automation, it just won't drop there. I can drop other places, but there are certain things like that I can automate, but this just is not automatable. And there'll just be some things that fall into that category, Tom. So good observation. That would be the goal, but there are some things that just can't. And that was what David was referring to, is like he found something probably that just couldn't be automated. And he was wondering how to deal with that. And I think the only solution is just to record to audio as you perform. Yeah. All right, cool stuff. Yeah, so multiple loops, zone envelopes. This has been fun. Are there any last questions? I'm seeing about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I answer everything. I'm going to look back in the chat here and see if I'm missing something. Oh, live performance. Yes. Okay. So do I use Kontakt in a live performance? Absolutely. Absolutely, I would use it in a live performance. Couple things that I would suggest you work with in a live performance. The first one is if I'm using Kontakt in a live performance, I tend to run it standalone and keep the buffer size down as much as possible. So in a live performance, you're really concerned with Kontakt reacting immediately, right? No delay, right? No latency. So the trick is going to be to, inside of Kontakt, go to the preferences. Oh, and I'm not sure preferences will pop up in the YouTube video here because it only is capturing the one window, but also I'll just describe it. In the preferences, you can go to under audio and latency, and I would suggest bringing that down so that the overall, you'll see it's mine. You can't see it because YouTube isn't capturing this other pop-up window. But if you go to Kontakt preferences, then audio and latency, I try to get it down so the overall latency, you'll see it'll say input, processing, output, overall. It'll have the overall latency that's being caused by that number of samples buffer. I would try to get that down a bit. I usually go to 128 samples as my buffer size for a live performance. And that's going to make Kontakt really responsive. And on my system, setting my latency to 128 samples gets my overall latency down to 5.7 milliseconds. Super fast, right? And so yes, solid state hard drive is key for that, definitely. I think that's it's a must. Also, lots of RAM and a powerful CPU. But if you can get it, if you can run Kontakt standalone, you're not dealing with the latency of the DAW and the latency of Kontakt. And all that overhead. You're simplifying things, bringing things way down. And then for a live performance, I'm going to be checking my CPU usage all the time and making sure that it never gets above, say, about 30% at all, right? So that's what I'm first looking for. And if I am seeing that CPU is getting above 30%, I may raise up that buffer size all the way up to 256. But if the latency is staying below 10 milliseconds, it's usually just fine, and it feels just good under my fingers. So that's the big first thing. And then you're going to have to really think about, how do I kind of organize my project really well, and organize Kontakt really well so that it keeps that CPU load down. The other things to start thinking about, what's going to kill you in a live performance is polyphony, right? And what's going to kill you on polyphony is going to be pianos, right? This is going to be the big issue, particularly because I think a lot of times it's keyboard players that want to be using Kontakt on stage. I would advise trying to use a piece of hardware for the piano sounds, particularly if you use the sustain pedal, because a piano and a sustain pedal is when you just kill your CPU. So if I got something like the Maverick, which I really like the sound of this piano, it's a great piano. Right, I have my sustain pedal hooked up. Let me get onto my desk here to right place. And I play. It's easy for me to really rack up voices. Like right now, there's 50 voices playing, right? When I'm holding that sustain pedal down. Now, I'm actually surprised. Actually impressive. I'm looking at my CPU usage, and even with 50 voices playing, it was only at like 12%, which is actually kind of stunning, isn't it? It's like having 50 tracks playing at once, but only using, I don't know, 20% of my CPU. Let's try it again. So I'm up to 60 voices. My audio is crackling though. 105 voices playing right now, right? And I'm getting all these crackles because there's too many voices at once. And so that's what I'd really think about in a live setting, is keeping the polyphony down. Now I can set the max voices lower, right? And so I can say, okay, in this patch, I'll set the max voices to 20. And that way, even if I use the sustain pedal and play, The max voices limit, so it's going to actually steal. It's going to remove voices if I get over 20, and it'll tend to remove. It won't remove voices that you're currently holding. It'll tend to remove voices that are just releasing out. You know what I mean? So if I'm holding this low note, it's low C, and I keep my finger on it, it's not going to remove it. It's not going to remove it because I'm still holding it. But if I played it and then had the sustain pedal and it was just kind of decaying away, because that was one of the earlier notes I played, it would kind of get rid of it, right? So that is going to be a challenge, right? But setting the max voices will keep the CPU usage down and protect you in the long run. Something that replaces the Muse receptor, yeah, a laptop. That's all it really was anyway, right? So I would just use a laptop on stage like everyone's doing. Bam. And it's a better interface too. Receptor was kind of a pain to edit and such, but laptop works great. Okay, so other things for live shows. Another one is going to be changing presets. And so how I tend to work in a show is add many instruments. So maybe I'll add the Rickenbacker bass here underneath, and carefully set the channels, right? So that I have the Maverick in channel 1 and something else in channel 2. And then I would tend to go to my keyboard and send on the correct channel to change between the sounds. You know what I mean? So I like to have like all the sounds I'll need for the show up in Kontakt, and then I just switch them. I change between them by choosing the right MIDI channel from my keyboard. And that's just using the MIDI channel right there and there. Now that's great for a smaller show where I can load everything up in a single rack. If you're going to be loading up more than like 16 sounds in a single rack, that might be a little more difficult. We can switch to different kind of banks here, which can be useful. But what I would then do is just be a little more careful with like maybe set 1 and set 2, and trying to find a portion in my show that I can kind of swap out the entire multi. And I would just save the entire rack that I need for like set 1 as a multi, set 1 multi, and then I'll save another one as set 2 multi, and then just switch between those with the mouse at some point that I can, between sets. So that's kind of the management of all the sounds. I also tend to make simpler sounds for the show. So sometimes I might find this really beautiful, huge piano sound that I'll use in the recording, but for the show, I'll choose a lighter version, something a little doesn't like hit the CPU so hard, you know what I mean? And it feels like in a live show you can get away with having kind of simpler sounds. It works just fine. And the record, you want something that's really kind of gorgeous. Awesome. Thanks for coming, guys. So with that, I think we're going to have to close this down. This was super fun to talk to you all. I hope you're enjoying the class. I really am. I had a blast with this. I had a blast making it. And it's been great kind of seeing your projects in the forums, and I'm loving the music and the community you've created. I will be checking in on the forums, and hopefully we'll do another one of these down the road, maybe toward the end of the class, or some point in the future. If you have any questions, put them in the forums. I'd love to see what you're kind of up to, and checking out your music has been awesome. Thanks for coming today. It's been super fun, and I hope I got to your questions. Have a wonderful night, and cheers. Peace.